Ignition sequence start. 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. Tower clear.
We got a roll program.
Welcome, friend, to the Pioneers of the Independent Networks. I'm your host, Ricky Blues. This is your co-host, Tim Walker.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Tim.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Anytime we get together in the PIN community, put some information out there for our fans, it is always a good time.
I agree.
And friends, if you've joined us in the past, you know that we bring you all the matches, the characters, and the promotions that populated the Mid-Atlantic independent wrestling scene from the 1980s to today. That's 4 decades worth of archive material at your fingertips.
That's a long time. I think I've said that before.
It is, and it's the truth.
40 years.
It's a lot of material.
Think about that.
And
we're old.
We are old. And the way that we give our introduction every week harkens to one question that our fans ask. How did it get started?
That's a great question.
It is. So this week, Tim, what would you think that our title of our episode should be?
I think it should be The Birth of the Independent Promotions.
Where are we coming from?
Well, I think we're coming from the maternity ward at the hospital. We're talking about birth.
That's awesome. I love it. That is so good. I didn't even think of it. So, Tim, as we present this episode, I think first we have to do some qualifying statements.
Okay.
So, when we say indies, we got to remember this, that up until the 1980s, really for the most part, every organization and promotion out there would have been under the umbrella of the National Wrestling Alliance. It was far-stretching, and everyone had a part under it. It was a board that came together that voted the direction of professional wrestling. If you weren't under that umbrella, then you were labeled what was an outlaw. You were an outlaw promotion. And outlaw promotions have existed for a long, long time. But in the 1980s, the early 1980s, as that umbrella was really far-reaching, and there was a lot of internal squabbling going on with the WWF at the time and with Fritz with the WCCW, people were trying to get out from that NWA umbrella and be the number one man, and there was a lot of competition. It created a lot of good things. But it also helped take those outlaw promotions that were still floundering and no one would really want to go there, you'd be blacklisted, and it turned it into another dynamic, and that dynamic become independent wrestling. So really it grew out of what the outlaws were and became independent as everyone reached for that brass ring to be the number one promotion. So it afforded a lot of opportunity for a lot of people who weren't in those promotions.
And I think a lot of the promotions in the 1980s that were considered independents were promotions that didn't have television outlets.
Right. We're talking house shows mainly, for the most part.
For the most part, shows at armories, shows at high school gyms, shows at community centers, that sort of thing. Shows at your local fair.
Right.
And I think there are a few wrestlers back then that really made careers out of being outlaws or independents. Like Bruiser Brody and Abdul the Butcher for two.
Think about it. No one particular federation or organization could house what they were doing because it was so unique and it traveled so fast.
They were like the real free agents of wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely.
They controlled their own bookings,
Right.
whether they took them or whether they didn't, their own travel, that sort of thing. So they really were pioneers of the independent networks.
Mm-hmm. 100%. So that's what we mean by the birth of the indies, moving from out from under the umbrella of the NWA to an outlaw territory, and from an outlaw to the independents. So what we want to flesh out here too for everyone is what were those early independent promotions, and we're going to talk a lot about the Mid-Atlantic because I think it's not necessarily a Mid-Atlantic phenomenon because it has spread, but it is housed mainly, like we've talked earlier, on the East Coast. It's an East Coast thing.
A lot of independents sprung up in the Mid-Atlantic region on the East Coast.
And gravitate, which is in pop culture, is actual reverse because most trends start on the West Coast and come east.
But that makes sense because there are a lot of wrestlers whose contracts would come to an end in WWF, and then they really would have no place else to ply their trade.
Right.
And therefore, they started their own wrestling schools and their own wrestling leagues at that point.
Right. With the second prong of what we're talking about is the Godfathers. Now, we've already mentioned Bruiser Brody and Abdullah the Butcher. But Tim, tell us a little bit more about, so our fans get the understanding, what we mean by the Godfathers for the independent movement.
When I think about the Godfathers of independent wrestling in the Mid-Atlantic area, I think about people like Bam Bam Bigelow, Larry Winters, DC Drake, King Kalua, Jules Strongbow, and then a little bit later on I think about Max Thrasher, Tom Brandy, wrestlers like that, Tony Stetson.
That weren't afraid to be the star of a pioneering organization, take it on their shoulders and build it themselves.
They really did take it on their back and build promotions themselves. I know it's cliche to say, but they were the steak. And the former nationally known television stars were the sizzle. And we really have to give them credit for being the workhorses of those promotions, because they were usually the semi-main event or the main events of the cards, and they really were responsible for not only selling that card, but for the future cards that were coming up.
Perpetuating the business. They were pioneering every aspect of it. They took every aspect of the business, from creating, development, marketing, to each and every card, the functionality of it, the matches on it. It was all in their hands. And if it wasn't one, it may have been a small group, 2, 3, but at the most, and that was it. That's what we're talking about, being pioneers.
And if they didn't have a good match on the card where you were at, you knew you weren't going to come back for the next one.
Right. It was the meal ticket. There was no guarantees.
That's true. You're only as good as your last match.
Right.
And those pioneers really carried a lot of weight on their shoulders as far as paying it forward. They were really responsible for creating a fan base for independent wrestling. And without that fan base, where would we be at now?
We would not have what we have now. They were the pioneers that took it on their shoulders to do everything to get it to here. So that's the vein that we're coming from in fleshing out our show and shows today. And when we're talking about this, the area that we're talking about, the Mid-Atlantic, we're not just talking about 1 or 2 states. We like to frame it out as the 6 states that we were involved with. Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, and New Jersey. But along with that core area where a lot of talent was developed and traded and moved along, there was a few other places. I first want to stop at Massachusetts. And I know that's not in the Mid-Atlantic, that's in the New England states. But I want to stop at Massachusetts because you mentioned it earlier, Tim, about when people's careers came to an end, they set up shop, and then they developed. And one of those people was Killer Kowalski.
Oh, a great Hall of Fame wrestler.
Exactly. And so in 1979, as his career dwindled down, he set up shop in Reading, Massachusetts, developed his Killer Kowalski School, and produced a lot of very good people not just very good people, but people who were to be the future of the business. I'm talking people like Triple H,
Wow.
Perry
Yes.
Saturn, China. And not only did a number of his students make it all the way to the big leagues and now pretty much own the big leagues, but there was a lot of independent talent that was produced too. One name that comes to mind that had a lot to do with the early development of Maryland was Dave Coleman, the surgeon, trained by Killer Kowalski in the early 1980s.
And what an influence he had, not only in Massachusetts, but then when he migrated to Maryland.
Right?
And he brought what he learned to Maryland, and he taught a lot of people.
A lot of those early people, the Rip Sawyers of the business, the Axel Rottens of the business, a lot of their knowledge comes from Dave's experience at Killer Kowalski's school. Now, another pioneer that we have to give credit to before we actually get into the Mid-Atlantic is someone who fed the Mid-Atlantic. And we're coming right again from Massachusetts, from Boston. And I'm talking about, at that time, what was called International Championship Wrestling, which was owned and operated starting in about 1984 by Angelo Savoldi. And he brought his sons, Mario, Joe, and Tom, along with him in that business. And they created ICW at that point, and they continued to grow. They had fostered a relationship with Carlos Colon down in Puerto Rico. Also with all the talent that was coming out of championship wrestling in Florida. That's the Funks. That's
Kevin Sullivan.
Sullivan. I mean, you're talking some heavy hitters. And then later, they developed a partnership with the Von Erichs out of Texas and wound up changing their name to International
World Class Championship Wrestling.
Right, the IWCCW, where they merged those two businesses. And at one time, that merging brought together what would have been a title tournament finalist with Kevin Von Erich and Tony Atlas, who was the ICW champion at that time, and Von Erich being the WCCW champion at that time.
Unlike a lot of the other independents that we're going to discuss, the Savaldis actually did have a television network.
It's quite a fashion plate inside and outside the ring. You used to do a little modeling, didn't you, at one time?
Who, me?
Yes.
I thought you did.
Oh, well.
No.
All right.
No.
In the turnbuckle, there goes the knee to the midsection of Jumpin' Joe Savoldi. And right now it is, oh, look at that. He stops him, and turnabout is fair play, and into the turnbuckle goes Rick Martin. And a left hand by Jumpin' Joe up in the ear. And Martel, look, I tell you, this guy, he's smart. He anticipates the moves. Savoldi's a great wrestler, but he does not have the experience under his belt. He doesn't have those notches on his belt like Rick Martel. He's paid his dues. Savoldi has quite a future ahead of him.
No question.
He hasn't faced the caliber of opposition to this point like Rick Martel. He's been in with everybody. And there goes an elbow to the small of the back of Jumpin' Joe Savoldi.
Yeah, we'll have to find out. A little leverage there.
Look at this. Martel is grabbing the top rope while the referee is down. This guy knows every trick in the book, I'll tell you.
Yep, he
and
sure
some that aren't even in the book that he wrote.
Yeah, I'm sure he has. You talk about arrogance. Well, I would say he's one of the inventors of arrogance. He's looking mighty proud of himself now.
Actually, in a long career of hundreds of matches, he's probably only lost maybe 3 or 4 matches. Martel's got an excellent record, one of the best in professional wrestling. And,
well, this time he got caught with his hand in the cookie jar.
Doing what I think he should have done.
Exactly.
Kick that hand off the rope. Hey, you're going to cheat? Then you get what you got coming to you.
That's it. Like I said.
And look at that suplex by Rick Martel.
Only 2.
And that was close.
Yes.
That was close.
It was very, very close.
And now Martel sending Savoldi into the ropes. And, look at that.
Interesting move, and a lot of force behind that move, that's for sure. As he put a lot of pressure on the back.
And Savoldi, I'll tell you, win or doesn't matter, it won't hurt him because he's gaining valuable experience that later on will serve him in good stead.
Well, right now, his back is going to be hurting a lot. He's taking a tremendous amount of punishment Rick Martel is enjoying it.
You know, the only way you learn, oh, look at that. He moves out of the way, and Martel goes flying into the solid ring post, that metal ring post. As I started to say, the only way that you learn is by wrestling the top wrestlers. That's the only way that you do learn.
That's right. He's getting an education today. He made a few good moves up there, but this is far from over.
Now, right now, I think he's going for a PhD in there with Rick Martel, because Martel is... Oh, look at a small package by Savoldi.
Almost had him. Talk about coming up with a big move. That would have been a tremendous win for Jumpin' Joe Savoldi if he could have...
there goes that knee to the small of the back.
That back is taking a lot of punishment. Martel looking very happy right now, very proud of himself.
And so is that young lady ringside. There she is, caught on our monitor here.
She's quite happy.
And now Rick Martel going up on the top rope here. As we promise you, the great legends, the superstars of the sport each and every week right here. And look at Savoldi putting a little vibrating action.
Oh, that's kind of smart.
Oh my, is whatever, that young lady not looking very happy at the moment.
Oh.
And Savoldi now. And there's a left by Savoldi. Savoldi throws him into the turnbuckle. Hip toss by Jumpin' Joe. Savoldi up into the air. Flag drop kick by Savoldi. Another flag drop kick by Jumpin' Joe Savoldi. What a turnaround in this match. And it's a left hand by Savoldi. Into the ropes goes Martel, and a clothesline by Jumpin' Joe Savoldi. And going for the cover. 1, 2. Oh my.
Boy, that was close. That was very, very close. That was like 2 3/4, wasn't it?
Well, I'll tell you, so far, Jumpin' Joe Savoldi getting through this classroom experience, and you got to give him top grades. Oh, hey, there's Martel and Savoldi. You heard of a pain in the neck? Well, he's a pain in the neck right there as Martel, using those ring smarts, backs him into the turnbuckle.
It looked like he was trying to go for some kind of a sleeper hold or something. I'm not sure what he was trying to do, and it didn't quite work. Right now, they're both taking stock of what they have to do up there on the scored circle.
You know, I hope the fans at home are appreciating a great scientific match like
Go
they're
again.
seeing. And now it's a sleeper by Jumpin' Joe Savoldi. We've seen some great wrestling maneuvers in this match.
Yeah,
We've seen some punches, and we've seen some kicks and some brutality, but we're seeing some great scientific wrestling on the part of both wrestlers.
Oh, my, look at this. The referee apparently is knocked out as both the referee and Jumpin' Joe Savoldi were slammed into the turnbuckle.
They
And
kind of got caught in the backwash on that one. Savoldi trying to wake up the referee. What's
Martel has something in his hand. It's blocked.
It's blocked by Savoldi. And they're fighting over that object.
What is that?
It's his perfume spray or bug spray or whatever.
No, I don't know what he's... Right now, Savoldi has it. The referee is finally coming to. And
Savoldi... Uh-oh.
Well,
and there...
Oh, my.
And not only did they have a television network that aired throughout New England, but they paid visits to New Jersey, to Pennsylvania, to New England. They forged a relationship with the AWA that gave them that Minnesota market. They also showed up in the Cayman Islands, in Greece, they had world tours.
Yeah, they were all throughout the Mid-Atlantic and also throughout the Northeast. Their area stretched all the way from central Pennsylvania up into Maine.
Yes.
They had a strong television foothold in Maine, and they actually ran a lot of television tapings and house shows in that area. As a matter of fact, you'll see a lot of television with King Kalua and Tom Brandy.
Right.
From around that time, where they were a tag team, and actually the tag team then split up, and they went their separate ways into singles competition.
Now, when you mention Tom and Mike, I'm going to give you a little nugget of information I don't know that you know of.
Okay.
Now, Mike was already pre-established. Mike Kalua, King Kalua, was already established. He'd worked in the AWA as a babyface. shows up in the Savoldi area. They bring him in. He turns heel, but in the process, that's where the training ground happens for Tom Brand. As a matter of fact, it's at the hands of King Kalua and a few others. Now, before Tom got into the ring, I want you to take a look at this picture here. It's King Kalua with Tom Brandy and another unnamed gentleman as his bodyguards.
Wow. Now that goes back a few years.
That goes back a long time.
And you know what? Tom really doesn't look that much different now than he did then. I mean,
add a few pounds and
he's
looks
found
the
the
same.
fountain of youth somewhere.
Oh, he's an incredible athlete. Not only, and I love saying this because this is the truth, and I say the same thing about Mike Kalua, not only are they fantastic athletes, fantastic in wrestling business, but they are just good people.
They are. One of my favorites from the IWCCW promotion is actually one of our old friends. How about Surfer Ray Odyssey?
Ray Odyssey. Now, there's a man who's got a lot of traveling. Most people know him from the WWA and Larry Sharps, but Ray has been in the business for a long time, in those early 80s, and not only did he show up in areas, but he was such a great talent that he was usually put over for the light heavyweight champion.
He was their light heavyweight champion for quite a while.
For a period.
And he had a memorable feud with Tasmaniac.
The Tasmaniac, absolutely. Long before the ECW days and the Taz days, he was the Tasmaniac in
IWCCW.
Savoldi's IWCCW. You know what? Speaking of the championships there was a period, and we've already mentioned Tom Brandy and Mike Kalua. They also became tag team champions there.
That's right.
Cream Team showed up there and had some battles, and they had some battles with one of the best known tag teams on the independent circuit at that time, who were also 3-time, I believe, IWCCW tag team champions, the Billion Dollar Babies.
Oh, yes. What a great team.
GQ Stratus, Mike Sampson, absolutely.
And then once they established themselves there, then they started to branch out into the southern part of the Mid-Atlantic, and they made a big impact in not only Pennsylvania, but Maryland as well.
And for those who are real wrestling stalwarts, Virginia, David Lehigh's VWA that we'll talk about here momentarily. Now, we just talked about tag team champions. The IWCCW also spawned, in very early incarnations, they didn't actually spawn them, they helped to develop them, 2 other stars. Ted Petty, who at that time was the Cheetah Kid, talking about light heavyweights. Boy, was that man world traveled. And another guy who at that time went by the name of Johnny Rotten.
He later became one half of the ECW Tag Team Champions, half of Public Enemy.
Johnny Grunge.
That's right, Johnny Grunge.
So he and Ted Petty did some time in the Savoldi's organization, later developing into, as you said, Public Enemy.
I think his work as a Cheetah Kid is so vastly underrated and overlooked.
Oh, yeah.
I can remember back in the early 90s, the Cheetah Kid wrestling a very, very young Cactus Jack for Dick Karakoff's National Wrestling, which is another founding independent promotion in the
Right.
Mid-Atlantic area.
Right.
I think it played a very important role in the key states of Maryland and West Virginia and Virginia.
Well, there was a lot of ties to other organizations that ran through there.
That is true. What a spectacular match. I saw Cheetah Kid wrestle a very young Cactus Jack at that time. And Cactus Jack was managed by Kevin the Truth Casey.
Wow.
Just an excellent match that all these years later, I still remember very well, very fondly. It was a packed house at a high school gym in Virginia. And it was so funny. There was hardly any room in the bleachers. People were closer than what we are right now, packed in those bleachers. They were shoulder to shoulder, just trying to get a seat in the bleachers. And they had a fantastic match. It probably went the better part of 30 minutes. Because, Ted, when he liked to work, he liked to work.
It was right. It was work. It wasn't high spots. It was work. It drew you in.
And it was such an amazing match that Cactus Jack started out the match being managed by Kevin the Truth Casey. And by the end of the match, Cheetah Kid and Cactus Jack had earned so much respect from the fans that they were both being cheered and they both ended up taking out Kevin the Truth Casey at the end.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
It was. It started out with a small group of people in the stands cheering for Cactus, and it just grew and grew and grew. But the crowd didn't turn on Cheetah.
Mm-hmm.
They were there for Cheetah the whole way, too. So the villain in the match ended up being the interfering manager.
Kevin Casey. Kevin, that's why we exist here, because he was one of those managers that we like to mention, because he was instrumental in a lot of things too, especially the talent exchange, as we'll talk a little bit later, between Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Another guy that we can't fail to mention, Mondo Clean.
Oh, yes, who later became Damian Demento.
Damian Demento.
He was definitely one of the pillars of the IWCCW. He got a lot of television time and a lot of storylines, so he definitely played a big role at that time as one of the main heels in the IWCCW. It was very interesting. He later became Damian Demento in the WWE, and then after his run in WWE, he became 3D, where he wore the mask and the purple outfit. It was a very interesting character on the independents, where he worked in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, that sort of thing. I remember him working with Tom Brady a lot around that time, and being questioned about the new image that he portrayed with the mask and the outfit. At that time, he said that he was interested in working for Mexican promotions as that character, and that character would fit in with the other Mexican wrestlers, which I thought was a really smart idea. It was really forward-thinking at that time, if you think about it.
Absolutely.
One of the big baby faces in IWCCW who really, really doesn't get mentioned very often at all is Vic Steamboat.
Oh, until you just mentioned that, that slipped to the recesses of my mind. Vic Steamboat.
He and Tony Atlas had a never-ending feud, it
Right.
seemed like, back and forth for the IWCCW heavyweight title.
Right.
And I believe at one point he actually won the title from Tony Atlas.
Wow.
And a lot of television time devoted to Vic. Definitely good-looking guy. Definitely the Steamboat name made him an impact player in IWCCW.
And he could work. He had legitimate skills.
Yeah.
So the overall statement that I would say, Tim, for the IWCCW is that in those days, they provided, that early 80s time period, the formula, really, that every other independent promotion would follow. They had television. They worked continuity and storylines. Not only did they work in their area, but they moved from state to state and a traveling show. Not only did they go from state to state, they showed the formula could succeed in international travel. Every other organization that's come after that has tried to do those same things, working on that formula. They did a great job laying that early groundwork. And a lot of people that developed that mid-Atlantic indie scene owe credit to what was done by the Savoldis and how we broadened it once it was laid in our hands. I've got some holes burned in my shoes. We've traveled some serious miles.
A lot of miles in this episode.
We have.
And I think we have a lot of miles still to go.
We do. We sure do. We're only part way through. So we're reminding you to join us again next week as we continue this look at archives in history that developed the Indies, the birth of, as we take that stroll down Concussion Lane and continue this episode next week.